Hey guys, it's Chris from Highline Guitars, and you're watching another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench. This episode is going to be part one of a series that I am going to be putting together over the course of the next month or two. And I'm going to be building a steampunk inspired guitar. Now, if you Google steampunk guitars, you will see a plethora of guitars that were built using this so-called steampunk fashion style. And I'm going to be building a guitar which will be inspired by the steampunk look, but not necessarily full-blown steampunk look. I'm not going to cover this guitar in lots of copper pipes and hoses and tubing and faux gauges and all kinds of other steampunk-inspired design accoutrements. Rather, I'm just going to take some steampunk ideas and incorporate them into the design of this guitar. Now, I've already created the design on my computer, so I'm ready to actually start building the guitar. And as you can see, the design is going to incorporate some fretboard inlay as well as some body design cutout, some carving work. A fairly simple approach. I don't want to go overboard because steampunk tends to look somewhat ridiculous if it's overdone. So I'm gonna use the whole steampunk look as my inspiration, but then I'm going to apply my own design sensibilities to it. So we'll see how that turns out. I think it should look pretty cool. I've done some testing and it does look pretty interesting. So, and I think it'll be a lot of fun to do. And I think as you watch, it may give you some ideas of what you can do, you know, for your own guitar builds down the road. So what I want to do in this episode is begin the process of building the guitar by first selecting the wood for this build. So let's head out to the lumber yard and start selecting wood for all the different parts of this guitar. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked about using a specific type of wood for a guitar body. Folks have asked me if they could use oak or cherry, hickory, I mean, you name it. There's so many different kinds of species that are out there that are now available in lumber yards that it sort of begs the question as to whether or not they can be used in a guitar. Well, when you look at a guitar's structure, you've got a body, a neck, and a fretboard. 3 components, and each one of those has slightly different requirements that you need to consider when selecting the wood that you're going to use for building a guitar. I think first of all, overriding everything is the wood's ability to be worked, to be carved, to be sanded. Some woods lend themselves to that better than other woods, and you know, you've got to kind of consider whether or not a particular piece of wood is going to carve nicely, whether it's going to yield a neck which has a nice smooth contour, or if you know, is it going to have a lot of pores and grain structure to it and that sort of thing. So you have to consider that. That's kind of the overarching consideration. But for each of the components, the body, the neck, and the fretboard, they have different rules of thumb that you should consider. With the body, there are a couple of things that you should consider. One is weight. Weight is a very major aspect of the guitar, its overall design. And the wood that you use for the body is going to contribute significantly to the weight of the guitar. And if you use a wood such as oak or cherry, you're going to add considerably to the weight unless you're willing to channel the body. And you can also use woods like alder or basswood, which are much lighter in weight. Another is swamp ash. And you have to be concerned about whether or not that lightweight body is going to cause neck dive, that sort of thing. So you got to kind of take that into consideration. Weight is a critical factor with selecting wood for the body. Another factor to consider is its ability to resist dents and dings. Now for this guitar build, I'm going to be using alder. And alder is a hardwood, but just barely. It's not much harder than, say, pine. And as a result, you know, you've got to be conscientious about how I'm going to finish the guitar so as to hopefully reduce the potential for dents and dings by whoever purchases the guitar down the road. And one way to get around that is to cap the guitar with the harder wood so that the front surface is much more durable than what's underneath it. The back isn't necessarily as, or it may or may not be, it just depends on your perspective. But the top of this guitar is going to use, this is Eastern Rock Maple, and I'm going to cut off a couple of half-inch slices, glue those together, and put that on the top of the body, and that's what I'm going to carve my steampunk design out of. And this stuff is extremely durable, so I don't have to worry about dents and dings with the body just by using that. Now the back of it could be a bit of an issue because it is the alder and that is softer, but it's just going to depend on how the person who plays the guitar takes care of their guitars. So now with the neck, the most important factor to consider is the wood's ability to resist string tension. As string tension, which is usually around, with a 6-string guitar, it's usually around 300 pounds of pulling force. That can cause a neck to bow and it can cause it to twist. So you have to use wood which has adequate density and bending resistance in order to use it as a neck. And you know, traditionally the wood that has always, the two woods that have always been used in making necks is maple and mahogany. Now, maple and mahogany are both very different when it comes to resistance to bending. Maple, especially Eastern Rock maple, hard maple, is very resistant to the forces of string tension, and it is ideally suited for making guitar necks. And that, in fact, is what I'll be using. This is a big slab of Eastern Rock maple, and I will carve a one-piece neck from this slab for this guitar. If you're using a wood that doesn't have as much bending resistance as maple, if you're going to use like mahogany, you would want to consider using quarter sawn, and that's where the grain is running straight up and down in the neck, and that helps to reduce the potential for bending and warpage and that sort of thing. And you also want to make sure that the grain is running as straight as possible all the way through the neck wood. But by all means, don't necessarily feel like you have to use those kind of woods. If you see a rosewood out there or something that, you know, maybe out of the ordinary that you've never heard used in a guitar, but appears to have what would seem like the right qualities for a neck, try it. You know, use it. There's no reason not to. Don't get locked into this idea that you have to use certain woods because that's what luthiers have always been using. It's important to remember, luthiers back in the late 19th century up into the early 20th century, they were using woods that were commonly available to them. And those woods were popular with furniture makers and piano makers. You know, Orville Gibson, when he started building acoustic guitars, he was using the same wood supplier that a local piano maker was using. So obviously that piano maker was using mahogany and a lot of ebony. So that's what Orville Gibson used in his guitar because he could get it. he couldn't just go into a lumber yard and look at just this enormous variety of different kinds of hardwoods. He only had certain woods available to him, and so that's what he used. Well, now we're kind of locked into this tradition of using that, even though we have an enormous variety of different kinds of woods. And to illustrate that point, that's kind of what went into play in selecting the wood for my fretboard. Typically I would use like an East Indian rosewood or ebony or maple. Well, in this case, as I was looking through the wood, I came across this, it's a species I'd never heard of before called Pau rose. Not to be confused with Pau furrow, that's a different species. I looked up Pau rose and found that it has all the qualities that I want in a wood for a fretboard. A fretboard has to be dense enough and hard enough to really hold the frets in place so that they don't want to work out of the slots that they've been inserted into. It also needs to resist the heavy wear that we put on a fretboard as we play the guitar and press the strings down to the fretboard. And this wood is extremely dense and it is incredibly hard. Now, wood is typically gauged in its hardness using a test called the Janka hardness test. And what they do is take a ball bearing, place it on the wood, and then apply downward force onto that ball bearing, and they press the ball bearing into the wood. And once that ball bearing is has been pressed into the wood equal to half its diameter, they look and see how much force measured in pounds it took to do that, and that's the Janka hardness scale, so, or the Janka hardness measurement. And typically I look for fretboards that can resist or it can stand up to about 1,400 pounds of downward force to press the ball bearing into the wood. That's common with woods like maple. When you look at woods like rosewood, East Indian rosewood, or ebony, the amount of force necessary to press that bearing into the surface goes up incredibly. So East Indian rosewood is like 2,300 to 2,400 pounds of pressure. Ebony goes all the way up to like close to 3,000 pounds of pressure. But I found, like I said, 1,400 pounds is the cutoff. That I won't go below that for a fretboard. And this particular wood was around 2,000 pounds of downward force. So, you know, that I think is perfectly adequate for a fretboard. And I can also tell as I run my fingers over the surface, this is a wood that's going to be able to sand very smooth and take a polish really nicely. So, and the color and grain on it is awesome. I can't wait to see this as it gets carved out and finished. So that's pretty much what I have for this episode. In the next episode, we are going to start preparing the blanks and get everything ready to start carving on the CNC machine. So hopefully you found something useful in this episode. I know it was pretty wordy on my part without a lot of action. However, I intend to rectify that in the next episode as I begin preparing the blanks and get this project going. So until the next episode, you know, be sure to click the thumbs up button if you enjoyed this video. And if you don't already subscribe, hit that subscribe button. Click that bell notification so that you'll be notified each time I post up a new video. And that way you will be aware of when the next part in what I'm thinking is going to be maybe a 8 to 10 part series. It's going to probably run through a good part of this summer. So yeah, click that bell notification, and until the next episode, take care and we'll see you soon.